Nightmares of the sea. Nightmares of the sea. Many a young man fell victim to the allurements of sailing, which were numerous. Things such as adventure, faraway places, exotic animals, uncommon experiences, the camaraderie of shipmates. But you know, that glamour typically faded off pretty quickly to the harsh reality of what sailing really was. The boredom of long journeys and the endless monotony of looking out at the ocean. Frayed relationships. Peril on every hand, such as fierce winds, shallow rocks, which meant a graveyard for ships. Let's take our next slide, and you'll see a ship up against the rocky shore. That's reality in sailing. Let's look at the next slide. I showed you one similar to this. I took that in a lighthouse up in Prince Edward Island on the far eastern side of the island. And the lighthouse was the lighthouse that heard the signal from the Titanic. And I'm not sure if they even knew what was going on from the signal, but all around that island, it's all these little dots. Now, if you were up closer to the screen, you could read us the name of ships and the year that sank. So the other day, I thought, I wonder how many ships are on this. So I went around and counted. There's over 100 ships that sank around the shores of Prince Edward Island as of when this map was done. It is literally an island in the middle of a ship graveyard, everywhere, on all four sides. That's the reality of sailing, the danger of it, and crashing waves and hidden currents and icebergs. And what ship was sunk by an iceberg? The Titanic. Ominous clouds hindering starry navigation, mutiny. Can you think of the name of a ship that was infamous for a mutiny that took place? The Bounty. The Bounty. Fletcher Christian and all that took place there. Now, in one of our A to Z lessons, our Sequoia lessons, I tell the story of the Bounty. And the Bounty, though it started out as a terrible story, and the mutineers, some of them made them to an island. They sank the ship so they couldn't be found. And they had taken some of the Tahitian women and a couple of children, and they were undiscovered for 18 years. And it was an American vessel that discovered the civilization on the island because they saw a cooking fire. The island was uncharted, and that's why they could hide there for so long. And Fletcher Christian knew it was uncharted, or it was mischarted. And so he knew that it'd be hard for the Royal Navy to find them. And the Royal Navy would come after them, and did come after them, but couldn't find them. But when they were discovered 18 years later, the people had, the one mutineer that was still alive, he had gotten saved by reading the Bible that he found among the luggage of one of the other mutineers. He read the Bible and he got saved. And then he taught the ladies to read, and he taught the children to read. So there's 56 people on the island when they were discovered, living in harmony, living peacefully, educated. It's just really a tribute to the change that takes place when people learn God's truth. Disease, hungry sharks, inexperience, ignorance. You know, the dangers in sailing were not just in the waters, but it was on board as well. But the dangers outside the ship it was real. Storms from above and dangers from beneath. They could scare you, and they certainly could sink you. So why was an experienced mariner experienced? Because he managed to live long enough, to survive long enough to learn the dangers of the sea. And then he became an experienced mariner. But along with that experience also came a lot of superstitions, such as flowers. Flowers were for funerals, and they were not for frigates. And there's many a bon voyage that started with flowers being brought on board by someone's sweetheart, but they were quickly thrown into the sea lest it jinx the ship. Clergy were not welcome for the same reason, though they weren't thrown into the sea. Sharks following a ship was an omen of death. An empty casket on board meant someone was going to die. Killing a dolphin or a gull or an albatross brought bad luck. And the albatross story was immortalized in Samuel Coleridge's poem, Rime of the Ancient Mariner, in which a sailor killed an albatross, and then he was dogged by tragedy and misfortune the rest of his life. These are superstitions that the people had. Stepping aboard ship with your left foot first was problematic. Losing a bucket overboard, seeing rats leave the ship, having women on board was bad luck. Good luck came from tattoos, black cats, babies on board. Now, why would you have babies on board if women weren't allowed to be on board? I don't know. Old shoes thrown overboard was good luck. Since most sailors couldn't swim, bathing in the ocean was considered dangerous. It was tempting fate to go take a bath. And so it was a pretty foul-smelling group of people sailing the ships. Now, you may recognize this next picture. This is a uniform. Does that look like a sailor's uniform? Well, that's what it is, a sailor's uniform. And they were different, of course, different colors and a little bit different styles, but they had the little square piece on there. A jack tar. But that name was originally applied to the men that worked in the riggings up at the top, high parts of the ship, but over time it came to refer to all deep water sailors. Now these sailors would use tarpaulin. Now we just shorten that today, we call it tarps. They'd use tarps, and they would use them to cover the hatches to keep water out. It was kind of a canvas, it was permeated with tar. They would take the tar and they would smear it all over the rigging, the masts and all, to kind of waterproof it. They would put it on the tar on their outer garments, the ones that were up working high in the wind and in the storms, because it provided protection from getting wet, having the tarry outer garment on. And they even did this. They took tar and they slathered their hair with tar, pasted it down, so when they're up in the blowing wind doing their work, their hair doesn't blow all over. It's kind of stuck to them. And the square piece on the uniform is because they had tar on their hair, and it was to keep the tar off of their clothes. Sailors had a fatalistic view of drowning. The object was to stay on board and out of the water. And if somebody fell overboard, they might not even be thrown a rope, because the sea's going to have what the sea wants. And then they thought, if that's kind of tempting fate to rescue somebody from the water. Now, not all ships were like that, but that was not uncommon. Sailors knew there was some element of risk in sailing, and yet they thought, it will not happen to me. So we should put that in your fill-in blank. It won't happen to me. If they believed it would happen to them, they wouldn't have gone to sea. But shipwrecks did happen to them, and a lot of shipwrecks. And I think I told you in an earlier session, there's over 3 million undiscovered shipwrecks. That's the estimate, scattered all over the ocean floor, across the earth. Some of those thousands of years old. A large number of these shipwrecks are historically significant, and they're protected under UNESCO as underwater cultural heritage. UNESCO is an acronym that means United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So they protect certain wrecks because it's culture down there. And in your notes, shipwrecks happen to godly people. You have to understand that. Shipwrecks happen to godly people. One of the shipwrecks in the Bible occurred to a godly man as he was doing God's work. We're going to read the story, and in this story, this story has the following words in it. Ship, sail, coast, winds, island, quicksands, which means sandbar, that's your fill-in, sandbar. Lading, boat, undergirding, tackling, fathoms, anchor, stern, shipman, sea, ropes, rudder, mainsail, shore, waves, swim. All of these are sailing terms or terms relating to the sea. So look with me in chapter 27, verse 2, and we're going to pick up this story. And entering into a ship of Adramyttium, we launched. This is the Apostle Paul on his way to Rome to stand trial before Caesar, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Crete. And that means under the protection of Crete. They actually sailed over the island, but under the protection. They needed the island to protect them from the winds, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the Sea of Cilicia, which is on the north side of Cyprus, and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us thereon. I want to add this in our notes, Roman numeral 2. We can be the casualty of other people's bad decisions. You can be doing things right, but still be the casualty of somebody else's bad decisions. And that is the Apostle Paul here. Verse 7, and when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone. It says they sailed slowly for many days, the wind not suffering us. There was a lack of wind, and the lack of wind made sailing adverse. They couldn't get motivation, movement. They couldn't get movement to go where they wanted to go. In the doldrums, you've heard that phrase, he's in the doldrums. What's that mean? Somebody's in low spirits, feeling drowsy? The word doldrums identifies a region on the globe just above the equator. The doldrum region just above the equator in the intertropical convergence zone. It's where the air is calm, the wind is light. It's between the trade winds. In the doldrums describe the state of ships experiencing this becalming area. They couldn't get sail. They couldn't move quickly. The phrase found its way into the English language. And today, if somebody is in the doldrums, means they're in low spirits, just like a ship would be if it was caught in this region, the doldrum region above the equator. Another phrase that comes out of the same idea of sailing is dead in the water. A ship was dead in the water when it was in a region where the wind was calm and it couldn't move. Or if the ship was broken, maybe the rudder or something else wrong with the ship, it would be dead in the water, going nowhere. Verse 8 in the Bible says, they're in this region where they're not getting sail. And verse 8, and hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh unto the city of Lycia. And when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past. All right, now it's taken them too long to get there. The fast is past. It's talking about the Day of Atonement, a fast day. Winter which was September, October, winter was rapidly coming, and it was considered dangerous to sail in the Mediterranean in the winter. So they're getting too close to the dangerous time. That's what he says, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only to the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and owner of the ship more than those things which are spoken by Paul. And when the haven was not commodious to winter in, you know what that means? It wasn't convenient. They're looking for convenience. And there's a lesson in that for us. If you're just looking for convenience, you're looking for the wrong thing. There's other things more important than convenience. But people want their creature comforts, and it was not commodious to winter there. The more part advised to depart thence. And the more part, we're told later in the story, 276 people. There's a lot of people on this boat. And if by any means they might attain unto Phoenice, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, the purpose of sailing to a convenient harbor. That's what they thought they were going to do. Loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete, but not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. Now, sometimes when you set a course in life, when we set a course in life, sometimes the winds turn contrary. Sometimes things happen out of our control. You try to put every piece in place. You try to order your life. You try to be careful with what you do. And then you step out, and then stuff happens completely out of your control. Contrary winds, and that's what's happening to Paul here. The course is turning difficult, and a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon came in. Now, in your notes, the word Euroclydon is either from the Greek word euros, meaning east wind, and akulon, meaning surge, or a surge of eastward wind, or from the Greek word euros, meaning east wind, and the Latin word aquilo, meaning north wind, or a northeaster. That's your fill-in, northeaster. The wind was blowing in a northeasterly direction. In either case, whichever combination that word comes from, it was a tempestuous wind, a typhoonic wind that struck the ship. And Paul was there, and 275 others, and they were on their way to Rome when they got hit by this wind and driven under the hurricane force of the winds. Verse 15, and when the ship was caught and could not bear up in the wind, we let her drive. That means they just surrendered. They tried to control the ship. They couldn't, so they hoisted up they lowered the sails to not catch wind, and they pulled the rudders up out of the water, and they just let the wind take it wherever it was going to take them. The crew had quit trying to steer the ship. Verse 16, and running under a certain island which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. And that means they were having difficulty getting the boat. They're in the ship. The ship is pulling a boat. And the boat is probably a lifeboat that they would tug behind the ship. They have to get that lifeboat up in the ship so they don't lose the boat. They might need it for some life-saving purpose, and they had a hard time, difficulty getting it up in the boat. Verse 17, which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship. So they passed some ropes all the way around under the ship. How they got it under the ship, up on the other side, I don't know. They're in a storm. But they wrapped the ropes around the ship to undergird the ship, to pull the ropes, to try to hold the ship together. And fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands or the sandbars, which was an infamous area on the North African shore. They want to stay away from the shore because of the sandbars, but they feared that they would shipwreck there. And they so were driven. Verse 18, and we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. That means they threw out the cargo. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. That means they threw out the ropes and the sails and the anchors, some of them, the sailing equipment, the stuff they needed to make the ship sail. They started throwing away the stuff that they needed to sail the ship because they had to do everything they could to make this ship lighter, lest it sink. And when neither sun nor stars and many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. May I tell you, lost hope. Lost hope. We're not going to make it. Now they're fearing for their life. But after long abstinence, verse 21, no food, no appetite, probably working night and day to try to keep this ship afloat, Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me. That's probably what they didn't want to hear. I told you so. You should have hearkened unto me, and not loose from Crete, and have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. Yeah, right. Be of good cheer. Now here's a guy, Paul. He's the kind of guy you can't keep down. You can't keep down. 2 weeks of this terrible storm. People are fearing for their life, and he's telling everybody, be happy. Be of good cheer. And he's going to tell them why. I got some good news for you. The good news is I have to stand before Caesar. That means I'm living. There shall be no loss of any man's life among you but the ship. We're going to lose the ship only. Now, another thought. God is in control of the storms of life. He is in control. Godly people face storms. Godly people at times they face the casualty of the bad decisions that others make. But God is in control of the storm. Verse 23, for there stood by me this night an angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. All right, that's good news for Paul. You got to go stand on trial before Caesar. But the good news is you have to survive this shipwreck in order to stand before Caesar, and you're going to survive it, and everybody else with you. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit, we must be cast on a certain island. And when the 14th night was come, and we were driven up and down Adria, that's just south of the Adriatic Sea in the Mediterranean, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. A fathom was 6 feet, so 20 fathoms, 120 feet. That's how deep the water was. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms, 90 feet. Uh-oh, the ocean floor is rising quickly. We're getting close land. We're going to run aground if we don't do something. And fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, and when they had let down the boat, that's that boat they had a hard time getting inside the ship, they let the boat down into the sea under color as though they would have cast anchors. So they're under the disguise that they're putting the boat down in the water. We're going to take the anchors, and we're going to row out, and we're going to drop the anchors away from the ship, around the ship. That's what they were presenting themselves that they were doing. But they had other plans in mind. Paul said unto the centurion and the soldiers, except these, the sailors in this boat, except these sailors abide in the ship, ye soldiers cannot be saved. If the sailors flee ship, the soldiers, you guys you're going to perish. We're all perishing. And so the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So they stopped the sailors from abandoning the ship and putting everybody's life in danger. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day, that ye have tarried and continued fasting and taken nothing. So these people are famished. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, and there shall not an hair fall from your head of any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. And I think Paul was unashamed. He's unashamed to speak for God. He's unashamed to pray. All this stuff is going on about him, and he's just committed to Christ, and he's praying. I go back to what I said a little earlier. Disciple in a restaurant. People are watching. And don't be afraid to pray in front of them, because you're going to give people encouragement, and you're going to cause people to question, and they're going to want answers, and they will come. And when they were all of good cheer, they took some meat, and they were all in the ship, 216 souls, 276. When they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, loosed the rudder bands, hoisted the mainsail to the wind, and made for shore. So they raised up the sail to catch wind. The rudder bands were these ropes that held the rudder oars up out of the sea. They dropped them down so the ship has a rudder on each side to steer with, and the wind catching the sails to drive it. And so they headed for this creek and ran the ship aground right at the creek where the ship broke up, and then they escaped on whatever they could find to float on. Verse 43, but the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose. The people were going to kill the prisoners. They commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on board, some on broken pieces of the ship, and so came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. Now, on the last, where there shows a picture of the wind currents in the Mediterranean, and it's probably the one at the bottom of the boot of Italy that was giving them such difficulty. And let's go to the last slide there. Malta is an island, and I circled, now we don't know where he landed on the island, but it is interesting that you see the piece I circled, St. Paul's Bay. It's named after this event of them escaping Euroclydon, making it to this land, and there they survived. They survived the tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. Your family will experience Euroclydons. Tempestuous times will come. They come in many forms. The trials may come to your family as a whole or may come to an individual within your family, but trials come. Ella Wilcox wrote, "One ship sails east and the other west, on the selfsame winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails and not the gales that determine the way to go. Like the winds of the sea are the ways of fate. As we voyage along through life, 'tis the set of the soul that decides the goal and not the calm or the strife." Now, I don't believe that poem. I don't believe that it's like the winds of the sea are the ways of fate. It's not fate. God is in control. God is in control. And if we stick with Him, if we walk with Him, if we are committed as a family, as leaders of the family, if we lead our grandkids this way, God is in control of them. He's in control of us. It's not just fate. But if you set your sight on God, when the tempestuous wind comes, you're going to bear up under the storm better by focusing your family on God. The trial is going to come. You can't avoid that. But how you are focused in the trial, that's what we have control over. Paul was in this tremendous, tremendous storm, and he kept his eyes on God, and it turned out okay. There are two men in the Bible that suffered shipwreck. One in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament. First one was Jonah. He's in that tempestuous storm because he's running from God. In Jonah 1:11, then said they unto him, what shall we do unto thee, that the sea may be calm unto us? For the sea wrought and was tempestuous. And he said unto them, take me up and cast me forth into the sea. That's what they did, and the calm came, but the whale swallowed them. Paul was the second one, New Testament. He's in the storm also. Jonah's in the storm because he's running from God. Paul's in the storm because he's running with God. One was being judged, and one was not. One was expecting death, Jonah, and one was expecting deliverance, Paul. But both of them were in the tempestuous storm because that is just life. It comes to everyone. I would rather be in the storm like Paul than be in the storm like Jonah. What a contrast of differences. When you think of the Apostle Paul, you think of a man that is fully committed to God. Faithful, solid. Just nothing shook Paul. When you think of Jonah, you think of somebody that just was filled with cantankerous ways. He didn't want to go to Nineveh until God punished him, so he went. Then he didn't want the Ninevites to get saved. And then he got mad at God because the people were repenting. I mean, it's, everywhere you turn with Jonah, it's a problem. And to a sailor, by the way, to a sailor in the age of sail, a Jonah was the guy you didn't want to have in the boat with you. They called unlucky people Jonahs. Oh no, you got a Jonah on your boat. That was bad news. And you want a Paul on your boat. You don't want a Jonah. And a Jonah day is a bad day. Now, years ago, I think it was PBS, came out with this mini-series, Anne of Green Gables. You seen Anne of Green Gables? Yeah. I saw Anne of Green Gables every year for 20 years. It was a family tradition. My girls wanted to watch Anne of Green Gables, and I watched Anne of Green Gables with my girls, and I watched it so many times I can recite the script to you. And there's a scene in my mind, it's burned in my mind. The words are burned in my mind. And Anne is laying on the bed, and she's crying, and she's had a terrible day, and Marilla sits on the bed, and Anne says, "Marilla, it was such a Jonah day." I didn't know what she was talking about. I always wondered, what's a Jonah day? And then studying the age of sail in preparation for the lessons, I ran across it. A Jonah day is a bad day, and it's tied to Jonah. So it made sense. So I understand Anne of Green Gables better now, since I've been doing this studying. Do you approach life like Paul or Jonah? Are you Pauline, persistent, committed to Christ, running with God? Or are you the sailor's worst nightmare, a Jonah running away? Euroclydons come to everyone. Paul's faced them, Jonah's faced them, and we will face them. When the tempest blows, do not shake in the wind. Do not drift away from God. You are anchored to a rock, safe and sure. 1902, William Martin wrote the Typhoonic tune to capture this sentiment. Though the angry surges roll on my tempest-driven soul, I am peaceful, for I know, wildly though the winds may blow, I've an anchor safe and sure that can evermore endure. And it holds, my anchor holds. Blow your wildest then, O gale, on my bark so small and frail. By his grace I shall not fail, for my anchor holds, my anchor holds. Mighty tides about me sweep, perils lurk within the deep. Angry clouds o'ershade the sky, still I stand the tempest's shock, for my anchor grips the rock. I can feel the anchor fast as I meet each sudden blast, and the cable, though unseen, bears the heavy strain between. Through the storm I safely ride till the turning of the tide. Troubles almost whelm the soul. Griefs like billows o'er me roll. Tempters seek to lure astray. Storms obscure the light of day. But in Christ I can be bold. I've an anchor that shall hold. And Christ is that anchor. Your grandkids need that anchor. And they need you to have that anchor. So stand firm on Christ and let that stance affect the kids that God allows your kids to give birth to. We're going to close in a word of prayer, and I'm going to ask the live stream to be cut at this point. And after our prayer, we're going to have a missionary come and give a report back. So let's pray together.